And my hair looks like it's super puffy.
Yeah,
I didn't think
good.
about that. It's good. It's got that puffy thing.
Are you just getting up?
No, I just forgot to. I just got up and then didn't think about doing anything about my hair because I've been up since about 6 this morning.
Yeah. So what time you usually get up?
Yeah, I wish. I try. But sometimes my problem is that it's like when I'm in a zone sometimes in the evening, I don't want to stop. And so if I'm doing something or I'm writing or, and so then I end up going to bed late and then I lose control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious what your schedule, do you have like a weekly schedule that you stick by in terms of writing? I got a video. Is it pretty strict or has it changed over time?
It's not strict. I'm the worst with schedule. So basically what's helped is that Lisa now basically puts all my appointments. She does all my appointments and usually those start at around this time, 10, and then going forward. So I try in the morning to get if I'm going to do some carving, I try to get that done. If I'm going to do some emailing, I try to get that done. And then I try to record one video a week. But then that depends too on when I'm ready, like when I know what I've got. So
yeah, no, I hear you. And you preparing for this, you've put so much content out there lately. I'm like, oh, what are you doing to me here? Me and Paul Vanderklay are kind of going nuts, trying to parse it out. So I'll give you just a hint of some things that came to me, initially to talk about Christ, the Lamb versus the victor of Revelation, the juxtaposition between the Lamb and what Christ is at the end times. The Theotokos and the symbolism of her blessed Dormition. There's something I wanted to throw out there we could talk about, but I had Enoch and Techne for Vaki, angels in scientific terms, civilization and control, your discussion with Paul Kingsnorth, encountering the living Christ, your discussion with Benjamin Boyce and James Lindsay, which I watched thoroughly, human sacrifice, your recent digital ID and control with Dr. Paula Baddington, and then general concepts, fractal identities, collective intelligences, collective thought forms, egregores, angels, demons, how do humans determine orientation, neo-paganism, revelation, and on and on and on.
A lot of stuff. There's no way we're going to get through all that.
So no. So I figured the first topic that kind of came to me was the question of the symbolic and the political.
Yeah.
So maybe we could kind of start there. And I have a little clip that I can maybe kind of inaugurate the discussion. And then I really like to just experiment in Dialogos to kind of see where it goes. I usually generally have questions, but I've recently gone away from that and just kind of trusting the moment that something what needs to come up will come up. But I felt a little nervous to do that in this case for some reason. Like, I don't know if I don't want to waste your time, so we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. No worries.
All right. Anything in particular you want to touch on or?
No, that's fine. No, I do have a lot of stuff going on right now. And so it's like the big surprise was Jordan asked me to come to Toronto and then asked me to do this event with him in Montreal this Monday. So I was on stage with him in this theater. So that's been huge. And it's also just messed me up in terms of my schedule, like so bad because I lost like 4 days last week. And then, so anyways, that's totally fine. But so that's been good though. It's been good because it's always good to continue that discussion. So
yeah, maybe we could start there. Was that the same event where you met with John Vervaeke and Rebel Wisdom, or is that separate?
So the one in Toronto, that's what it was. That's how it all came together because David Fuller asked me to come to Toronto to talk to John Vervaeke. And then Jordan wrote me something about his new book and said, I really like to have a conversation with you and John about this chapter in my new book. And so, and he gave me a day, and it ended up being the same day that I was going for John in Toronto. So I'm like, are you in Toronto, Jordan? Because we could do it in person. And so that kind of led to that. So I went there for 3 days, stayed with Jordan. I hadn't seen him since 2018 in person. So that was good. It's just good to be with people. Like same when I met you too. It's so much better to just have someone there in front of you and to, there's anyways, we don't realize, I guess we do realize just how diminished our relationships are through these screens. So it was good to do that.
Yeah. Excellent. What do you think that is? Because I feel the same way when you're with someone kind of in body. it's hard to describe qualitative difference than being with them on the screen.
Well, I think, I mean, you could explain it. You could probably explain it even just like scientifically, biologically. That is, human interaction is not just a visual and auditory experience. That's just total nonsense. You know, just like animals smell each other, like we don't necessarily explicitly smell each other, but we get intuitions. We get all kinds of subtle information that we don't necessarily even think about, but that is there it's just in the air. And so you have a fuller resolution of a person if you have them with you, you know. And so there could even, but I mean, it doesn't necessarily, it could lead to more problems too. Like it can lead to, because there's that physicality, which can lead to misunderstanding. It can lead to, you know, all kinds of stuff. So, but it's definitely a fuller experience. So I don't think, but I think it's the idea that we reduce people to images and auditory is something that is like this weird neo-Gnostic moment of the internet too, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even people that don't, you know, delve in this space or even have symbolic intuition can feel that. Everybody kind of feels that, you know, so I'm with you. It's interesting. Yeah, I hope to see you again in body sometime. Maybe if you guys take a trip down to Florida. I have some family up actually in Mississauga. Maybe one day I'll take a trip over there. I'm actually going to Greece with my son in July. They stopped all of the vaccine madness as of May 1st. So all of that is gone. Thank God.
Yeah, we still have it here. It's all here.
Yeah.
So our government is really clamping down on the necessity for flying and for crossing the border. Same with the US though. Like I can't cross the US border. So at this point, like it's just, for me, it's like a political protest. Like I keep telling, like at this point, I'm like, well, if I ever even get vaccinated, I'm not going to use their stupid passport. Like it's like, so it's not, there's really no point at this moment, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. My wife and I seem to have managed not to have to do that, you know, so far. So yeah, God bless. So I guess, you know, you don't need an introduction on my channel. But Jonathan Pageau, thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I know a lot of my subscribers subscribe to your channel and actually opened up some questions. I said that I would be chatting with you to see kind of, you know, if you have a good question and I use it, I'll reference you. And there's a bunch of great questions. You know, I've been treating a lot of Heidegger and Dugin on my channel. But there was a question from Symbolic Memes, and maybe we can just treat this really quick because I think it was a good question. I'll add to a little bit. First is how do you decide what to carve, what saint to carve outside of being commissioned? What is the decision-making process? And then the question was, how come you don't carve any more recent saints?
Well, it really is I would say 95% of my like almost everything I do is a commission. I don't really make a lot of things on my own. Usually if I make things on my own, my assistant like makes things on his own because we're experimenting with technique and with mosaics and different things like that. So if people who follow me on Patreon, my carving Patreon, will see a bunch of new carvings that are like more ornamental and stuff. And so if I ever do make an image on my own, it'll actually probably be one which it won't be very holy, but it'll be one in which I can try to synthesize a lot of the things we've been developing. And so try to create an image that will be able to introduce some of the ornamental work that my assistant's been working on. And so that's usually what I'll end up choosing. So that's why certain images, let's say certain scenes, certain kind of cosmic scenes, those that have trees and have different things are more conducive to that. And so the reason why I don't carve more more recent saints is just because I haven't been commissioned to do so. You know, I rather would work with commissions in general, although that might end just because I have a 3-year waiting list and I feel like it's just too complicated. I just have too many things to do. So I might do something else. We'll see.
Yeah, I think there's more going on there. The way that I've been experiencing the saints is you know, I'll come across some of their work and then I'll start reading about their lives, and all of a sudden an icon goes on my icon wall, and then it's like building this relationship. So I think there's something else going on with someone reaching out to you to commission particular carving of that saint coming into your life collectively, or you that person's life. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening, or a phenomenon there that's kind of hard to describe.
No, but you're right. I think like the relational aspect, this is one of the reasons why I like the commission, is because it brings about this relational aspect where I'm in contact with the person, they're in contact with the saint, and then I come into contact with the saint as well. So it really is like an image of this communion that we are meant to experience in the church. So that's one of the reasons why I like commission so much, is because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. There's something that dawned on me, kind of, I guess it's maybe frightening or not. Like, I've always been reluctant to read the Synexationum on the life of the saints, and I didn't really get why that's so important. And with the way things are heading now, I feel more drawn to read the lives of the saints, the martyrs, and kind of what happened in their lives. And it's like, and then I've been reluctant to share some stuff. I've been corresponding with Alexander Dugin via email. He's under sanction with the United States, and I'm like, my wife is like, that is that really a smart thing to do? We were maybe working up to a discussion, and I'm like, man, this thing could really unravel, where there could be a target on Orthodox Christians, because people don't know about Orthodox Christianity, and all of a sudden it goes into the media that this is some new jihad or something like that. So yeah.
No, but you're right. You're right to be careful, because I mean, I don't know, I can't vouch for what I've seen, but I've seen certain people, a certain priest talk about how their churches are under surveillance, especially the Roquefort churches. So you should definitely be attentive and careful with that.
Yeah. So I guess
if you're going to deal with Dugin, I would say, think about it. It's not, some people have, the people on the Stoa, Peter Lindbergh had Dugin on. I know Jay Dyer talked to Dugin. So it's not impossible, but I would say this is definitely, right now it'd be a difficult time you might have consequences on you.
Yeah. And his work, I've been, drawn to it, and then getting through the whole, this is a fascist, what do you do dealing with this type of person, getting into his philosophical work. And maybe we can get into some of the concepts here, because I think they'll be helpful. Dugin, the philosopher, is really, there's no inflammatory, crazy stuff that we see on the media. And he's actually has rectified his position on the West, right? And in terms of, he has an appreciation for America and for Americans, like for the middle of the country people. He said there's a certain ethic there that's necessary in terms of his understanding of what's happening geopolitically. But maybe we can get into that. But I think we can start with the general title of the talk. I wanted to something like Symbolism and the Problem of the Political. And I'm not interested in partisan. I don't think you are partisan politics. I'm more interested in it in a more kind of symbolic manner. And I think a great way to introduce this is this, it's like 2 or 3 minutes here, your talk with Father Stephen D. Young from about a year ago, right when the book, The Apostles, The Religion of the Apostles came out. And I remember hearing this section when it came out, and it stuck with me. So I came back to it. Even with all this material that you've been putting out, this was what kind of came to me. So let me share it. I put some context there, or some words on the bottom, so just in case it's too low. So here you go. Let's listen to a couple minutes here. Share.
But yeah, to make a beginning of it.
Yeah.
To make a beginning of it. Yeah. And there's what I was just talking to somebody about this today. One of the real problems we face, frankly, and I'm not going to get into politics, especially not Canadian politics, but that is one of the problems we face, because there's this whole territory of our communal life and our social life that's been bracketed off now as, oh, that's politics. You have to stay out of there, right? You can't go into there. That's not connected to anything else, and nothing else is connected to that. And they've kind of made it sacrosanct. And eventually it's not going to be able to be, right? Because eventually it's not enough to just reshape my personal life. eventually I've got to reshape my family life.
Yeah.
And then community life. And I mean, it's going to hopefully progress out from my personal life, right? That's the place that it starts.
Yeah.
But down the road, we're going to smack into that fence around politics. And there's going to be a kind of a reckoning where we're going to have to, things are eventually going to have to kind of dismantle in that arena to
Yeah, because it's happening. One of the things that postmodernism is doing is it's breaking down the material stability. Let's say the materialists, they at least had some kind of stability. They didn't have access to the angels, and they didn't have access to the demons, let's say. So they were a little bit protected from one side, but also protected from the other. And so as postmodernism kind of breaks down that solidity, a lot of dark stuff is seeping in. And so the politics themselves are already being, let's say, taken up by these weird demonic forces. And you can see it. It actually appears to you, right? You see possessed people, like, I don't know, literally possessed, but at least, they're semi-possessed, at least, or being ridden by a demon, however you want to say it. And so it's happening, and it has a weird coherence to it, like a kind of weird, dark coherence to what's going on. And so I think, like you said, that at some point we also need to be able to understand that as those that are looking to have discernment in this breakdown, and hopefully look up and look towards God and see how all this can come together, it's gonna have to face that. We're gonna come face to face with that at some point too.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd totally forgotten about that. Wow.
Yeah, that so I think we're coming face to face with that, and I think it's time to navigate with discernment in this territory and kind of see, what it means for us right now. Right. I think it's time. There's just too much happening too quickly. So I think it's time to maybe explore a little bit. Let me read you a quick quote from Noomakhia, which is Dugin's book. It's the terms nous and machia, so war of the mind, but obviously mind in the more broader, respect, not what's in your kind of brain. He says, wars between people, including even the most cruel and bloody, are but pale comparisons to the wars of the gods, titans, giants, elements, demons, and angels. And these in turn are but figures illustrating even more formidable and profound wars unfolding in the mind, in the sphere of the nous, and its limits, in which the mind itself borders the zone of madness. Thus, everything is Noomakhia. And just to, he talks about what's happening now in this idea. He takes eternity very seriously. And looking at modernity seems like to be this new thing, but it's nothing new. It's actually something very ancient and old, almost pre-Indo-European. And it's like the Titans, a return of the Titans. He calls it Titanomachy, right? Yeah. And it's like this very ancient force, this very ancient phenomenon is emerging through modern science. And it's not science in itself, like Aristotelian science. There's something about, the time of Francis Bacon and that turn towards, modern science, that is really this, and he juxtaposes it with the end of the second period, the end of the catacon, which is this, the withholder, which was Byzantium, right? When Byzantium kind of went away, that withholder from complete access of the son of perdition to the world has been removed. And just after that happened, we've had this emergence of modern science, which is essentially a new, it's spiritual warfare, a fight between the gods and the titans. And he calls it gigantomachy, titanomachy. So I think it's in line, kind of in a general sense, what's being discussed here. But maybe we can hone it in a little bit and define from a symbolic perspective and in this context what the political is.
So I think that the political is something like the intermediary world. That's the best way to understand it. And that's where a lot of the battle is happening. And that's why we tend to think of it as a battle of principalities. It's like the aerial battle, you see that in some of the weirder stories regarding St. Peter and St. Paul, right? Where you find these stories of them battling with Simon Magus, in the aerial domain. So they would have these spiritual battles. I think that's probably a good way to understand it. And so So the political is like, you could see it, the good way to understand it is left and right is actually a really good way to understand it. That is, that it's the world of opposites. And so what happens is, especially in American politics, you can really see it kind of crystallizing that way, is that you can understand that God acts with two hands, right? God has the right hand and the left hand. There's mercy and there's rigor. There are two sides to making this thing move. You know, you have to extend mercy and rigor for anything to actually exist. And so that's the place of the political in terms of social, where, you know, if you're too strict, at some point you crystallize. If you're too flexible, at some point you decompose. And so there's this discussion, constant discussion, right, about the situation and how to adapt the bigger bodies, like these communal bodies, to what's happening and what's happening internally. And so it's always messy, it's always difficult, it's always a problem. But if we at least focus on something above it, then hopefully we're able to kind of navigate without excess. What is it? There's that one of my favorite quotes from Rumi, who says that, you know, the way we do things is the hand must open and close subtly like the wings of a butterfly. But if you leave the hand completely closed, or if you leave the hand completely open, then you're paralyzed. And that's what we see in the political problem today, is that let's say the left and the right, or the open and the closed, or whatever, the opposites, instead of being, you know, the two sets of a motor that make the thing go, they've become like two polar opposites that can't talk to each other anymore. And so we have a kind of frozen situation. And that comes from not having anything above you. That's what it comes from, right? It's a knowledge of good and evil. It's the fall into opposites without a transcendent unity. So I think that's the way that I see it. And so I think that the danger is taking up a position, like a radical position, because you see the chaos of the other side, or the solidity of the other side. That's one of the dangers. The dangers is not taking up a position, and then what happens is one side pushes the other, radicalizes itself. Like one of the things we've been seeing is that, for example, like in American politics, everything's moving left. It's like this weird thing, right? This leftward lurch, where now someone who has like opinions that were considered absolutely, you know, milquetoast, boring, normal opinions just 30, 40 years ago, are now called far right or extreme right. And so that's also another problem. So it's like, if we do nothing, if we take a position, we risk we run the risk of falling into polar opposites. And if we don't, then we run the risk of being swallowed up by one side. And so it's very difficult in terms of, but I think that that's the way to understand the political. It's like this intermediary world where the motor's turning. So it needs the opposites. It needs opposition. It's just that you have to be careful not to let those opposites kind of crystallize into, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And that's another thing that kind of came up for me, is this intermediary space, right? And the term that was kind of floating around in my mind is, you know, Heidegger, his term being, but in his more originary fundamental ontological sense of being, B-E-Y-N-G. So quickly, you know, what happened at the beginning of philosophy, the pre-Socratics, was when this question of being dawned on humanity, on the pre-Socratic philosophers. And they started interacting. It was like a revelation, right? And the function and the understanding of being was quickly, this was the fundamental error, is said by Heidegger, that being as such quickly became the being of beings, as what is, you know, being is just a category that all beings share. And that led to Plato, who instantiated this fundamental error of this, of the forms, in a sense, and that the history of Western European philosophy is a degradation from this initial question of being down to Nietzsche, who was the final philosopher. So who ultimately elucidated and articulated this fundamental error. And I think there's something interesting about Nietzsche writing a book entitled Beyond Good and Evil. It's like, in a Christian sense, like that was the point. we of course we want to go beyond good and evil, but we ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Of course, you want to get beyond that. So I think there's something, kind of interesting there to think through. But
you're right, and you're totally right. But you can see it if you can see how it plays out in the story. It's that the problem is that once you've eaten the fruit, once you enter into the world of opposites, it's like the game is set. Things are going to play out. It's very difficult to stop it from happening. And so the fruit of that is death. That's it, right? God told Adam, if you eat the fruit, you're going to die. It's like, it's very simple, because that's what opposites end up doing if they're taken in desire, you could say. And so the solution of that is to die. That's the solution. And Jesus is the fulfillment of Adam. Jesus does what God said to Adam. God said to Adam, if you eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. And Christ said, yes. Adam said, no. Adam said, no, it's not my fault. It's your fault. It's this person's fault. He tried to externalize the causality and then tried to hold on, with the garments of skin and tried to survive. But Christ said, I'm going to eat the fruit and I'm going to die. And that's how you do it. So it's like, that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty of politics. And it's a difficulty of politics right now, because there's a weird antichrist moment where that tendency is weaponized against those that maybe should use it. That is, the idea that Christians should sacrifice themselves, let's say, for example. And so now there's like a weaponization of that, where it's like, yes, you should sacrifice yourself and get out of the way. And we're going to take over. It's like, you're a Christian, now shut up and sacrifice yourself and get out of the way. And so it's like, oh boy, what's going on? It's hard to know how to act in that situation, because you realize that it really is like a devil's trick where, so I don't know. It's like, even myself, like, I'm not sure how to deal with that problem in terms of politics, which is one of the reasons why I don't talk about politics so much, is because I can see this weird antichrist victim narrative and this weird antichrist reversal of this tendency of Christians to sacrifice themselves. And I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think it's an important distinction between self-sacrifice and imposing self-sacrifice from without.
Of course.
Yeah. I think that's an important distinction to trying to kind of flesh out in terms of dealing with this political nature, because it's not an abstract phenomenon anymore. We see it in our families and our communities. We kind of see it across the board. So I think it's important to talk through these things. Another thing that kind of in this space of in between politics being kind of this intermediary space, being like we talked about here, is kind of more attuned to that, I think. And then symbolism is this in between, right? Heidegger has this concept of thrownness, right? We're thrown into the world. Symbolism means to throw together, right? So we're thrown into the world, and we're in the midst of the world, kind of in the middle of, broadly these left-right categories, So, but there's this space that symbolism, resides in. Some more words that come to mind is the sacred, the holy, right? The place where heaven and earth meet and are mediated appropriately. The appropriate mediation of unity and multiplicity. This is all happening in the middle, in a sense. So it's essentially a political, reality that we're facing. So it's difficult to talk through and navigate kind of what's going on now. There's another kind of concept I wanted to introduce to you is Dugin brings in this idea of the transpositional structure of mythos and logos, the transpositional structure of mythos and logos, where there's this relationship between the logos and the myth, and they can be transposed onto each other, where the mythological all of a sudden is being transposed into the logical. And we're seeing like in this idea of Noomakhia, we're seeing the war between the gods, the spiritual warfare is fought through humans, right? So when we're talking about these political paradoxes that we find ourselves in, we're not talking about individual human consciousness. We're talking about more of collective consciousness. And we see this term, and it's funny, all of these terms that people are just finding now, like egregore or collective thought forum, the swarm, right?
Yeah.
They are there in, Enochian literature and just biblical literature. So it's an affirming thing when you see people that are completely in good faith coming at this problem from outside of the church are just bringing up new terms for these kind of very old problems. What are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on what on the fact that people are noticing, these kind of giant beings, let's say, or these giants that are kind of walking through the world? I think it's great. I mean, it's great in the sense that I think that we're definitely in an interesting moment where people are noticing the patterns and are noticing, these wills that are playing themselves out, and that it seems almost impossible to stop. So it's positive because at least now we can talk about it, because, not very long ago, and I've been wanting to talk about the Book of Enoch for 20 years, but I never had the guts to, because I was like, no one's going to understand what I'm talking about. Everybody's going to see it in like a weird science fiction way where they're going to imagine these demons coming down and having sex with women and then these giants. And so it's like, I can't talk about it. And then Father Stephen DeYoung came about, and, and Father Andrew. And all of a sudden, people, like you said, started talking about egregores, started talking about these collective beings. And I'm like, all right, so now we can talk about this. We can try to help people understand. Also, the notion of technical bodies, this idea of the garments of skin as extension of body, and as a kind of, how you see these mecha suits in science fiction movie, that's like a beautiful mythological version of what civilization is. It's a giant mecha, right? And so the mecha becomes the image of this garment that we put around ourselves, this giant body that we have around ourselves in order to increase our power. So when you see in an anime like a battle of mechas, you're basically looking at something from the Book of Enoch. You're looking at these two giants, these two cities, these two civilizations, but also in the heavens too, these principalities that are clashing against each other. So I think that's definitely something that's happening now, and we have to be attentive, because right now there really are principalities duking it out, and the idea of the West, it's complicated, because what are we defending? It's like, we're defending the West, and it's like the West has become so decomposed and so corrupt that it's like, what are we defending? But on the other hand, you look on the other side and you see a kind of authoritarian move, and you see the same type of stuff. It's like, it's so funny because you see people here, for example, that were like, let's say something like anti-COVID and anti-COVID measures, or like anti-control measures of COVID. And now the similar people like that are the ones that are pro-Russia. It's like, don't you understand that the type of controls that were set up here were getting set up in Russia too? Like, do you think that Russians are less authoritarian than our states? Are you crazy? Like, what do you think is going to like? How do you think this is going to play out? Like, there is no, I don't know. I don't see a rosy dawn for a very long time, out of this problem, because it's like, and that's why I've been pretty quiet about it. It's like, I don't think that these Western values are worth defending that much. That is at least not the degeneracy of these values into idiosyncrasy and insanity and incapacity to differentiate between simple things. But also, I'm looking on the other side, and I'm like, do I want Caesaropapism? Like, do I want a church that is so completely subservient to the state that it'll just say whatever needs to be said or do whatever needs to be done to advance its purposes? It's like, man, it's hard to be human right now. That's the only thing I can say.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case, and I've intuited and seen that happen as well. And a strange thing that happened to me. I went to St. Anthony's Monastery, one of Ephraim's monasteries, back in January. So this was before anything was really going on with Russia and Ukraine. And I was talking, when you go to the monasteries, and that's when when the Supreme Court was hearing the vaccine mandate. And I felt when you go to the parishes, I take the vaccine. It's, we have to wear the mask. We have to do it. And it is what it is, right? If you go to the monasteries, they're like, do not take the vaccine. Do not capitulate. And I met with Yerunda there, the main Yerunda there. And he asked me, he's like, have you taken it yet? I said, no. And my wife and I, she's a nurse. We haven't taken it. She's like, he's like, don't do it. And I'm like, well, we got a religious exemption. He's like, that's not going to last. He was really kind of forceful about it. And then he said, I forget exactly what question I asked, but he said, there's going to be an event that's going to occur that's going to shift the focus away from what's going to be vaccine injuries, right? Because of just the sheer number that were given out. There doesn't have to be a sinister anything to know that there's going to be some pretty nasty effects. He says there's going to be a geopolitical shift, a geopolitical conflict that's going to occur between Russia, where Russia will either bomb or look like it's going to attack either a Western city or something like that, and it's going to start this event. And 2 months later, all of a sudden, this popped up, and I'm like, "Holy Lord, have mercy!" Just my hair standing on head, just kind of thinking about it, kind of how that happened. And it's hard to a lot of people in my comments wanted to ask about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and it's not. There's no way to make sense of it now. It's just we can try grasp at straws, or we've been propagandized from one side or the other. So I think the stance is to be open to it, and kind of discern without making judgments as best you can.
I think right now is the time to be very attentive, just be very attentive at what's going on and how these things are playing out. And for the Orthodox, especially, because there's a weird moment right now where people are kind of gathering in their corners, getting ready for some kind of a fight in the Orthodox Church. And it's very difficult. Like, it's hard for me because, there's this weird thing. It's basically saying either you're on the side of the super left-wing, Orthodox that want to change everything, that want to accept everything, that want to transform all our ecclesia, the way that the church is set up, or now then you're on the side of Russia, and now you're on the side of an authoritarian who is invading. And so it's like, man, I refuse that dialectic. I cannot accept that. I cannot accept that opposite. Like, I'm not going to take sides, at least for now, in that conflict, because I think that the equivocation is nonsense. Like, I'm not gonna do it. So anyway, so that's the situation. But it's gonna boil. It's gonna keep boiling. It's gonna get a lot hotter. And that the fact that the Orthodox Church is right in the middle of this is not arbitrary. It's playing out. It's gonna be, yeah. The next few years are going to be very interesting for all of us. It's going to be intense.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel a strange sense of hope in it all, and even at how I think it's going to get worse. But there's something about this phenomenon occurring, and maybe I trust in Christ, and I trust in Providence, and so there's some hope. What gives you hope in terms of these dark times?
I trust the story. I trust what Christ said. I know that, Christ said things would get difficult. In Christ's story became difficult, and I believe in the resurrection. I believe in the actual resurrection but I also believe in small resurrections. I think that these difficult times also lead to new plateaus and to new moments of kind of recapturing. So that's my hope, is that I know that the story is a commedia. Like, I know that the story ends well. But we just have to get ready for the intermediary part. Like, we need to get ready for the
sit together.
No worries.
Yeah.
It'll be like, I think you'll have like a half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're getting to some challenging, territory to work through, but I think it's important. Let's talk a little bit. Let's double click more on this idea of spiritual beings, right? There's this. Are you familiar with the concept of Theurgy?
Yep.
And so there's this concept of Theurgy and Geotia, I think it is, right? So Geotia is like is the manifestation of the Titans, right? And then Theurgy is the manifestation of the gods, the Apollonian gods, right? And is there a relationship? What is the relationship between, the Olympic battles, Titanomachia, versus the spiritual warfare from an Orthodox perspective of angels and demons warring in the heavens? Do you think they're parallel?
Well, I think for sure there's a parallel. I don't know if it maps on perfectly. There is definitely in every single culture, there is maybe in every single one, but let's say in many cultures, there's usually a war in heaven at some point, and it's represented differently. In the Greek tradition, what's interesting about the Greek tradition is that the very origin of the gods itself seems to be, it's as if the conflict seems to, in a certain manner, be seen from the point of view of the gods, but the point of view of like the demons, instead of the point of view of the heaven, the god of heaven. And so, so Zeus, Jupiter, Saturn himself, castrates his father, the god of heaven, that leads to the monsters and to the giants, to the first giants. But then it's just a series of revolutions. And so Zeus, the idea is that Zeus restores some kind of order, but he does so, it by in similar ways. And he also kind of devours his own children. Like there's different versions of it, where he was going to devour his children or he doesn't. And so you have this problem in the Greek pantheon. But for sure, I think that the Christian vision is a better one, because it doesn't imply revolution at the outset. You have an orderly procession of beings from the infinite into the world. And so you have this orderly hierarchy. And then in that hierarchy, there is, because of the separation from the origin, it means that the possibility of seeing yourself as self-sufficient is always possible, because you're not the infinite God. And so because you're not, then you can see yourself as being, the top. And so the idea of the rebellion of Satan, or the idea of the rebellion of the angels at different moments in different versions of the story, is, I think, a better, more complete way of understanding the question of heavenly beings and how they interact with each other. And so a good way to see it, this is the way that I've been seeing it more and more, especially since Father Stephen de Jong has, it's kind of, in my mind, like justified my position by saying that St. Gregory Nazianzus has this image of the angels of the right hand and the angels of the left hand, and that the angels of the left hand are the demons, and that they're actually doing the work of God without knowing it, by being kind of like something like the wrath of God, or manifesting, the distancing from God. So that's the way that I see the world. And I see the world, I would say that just like you have an angel and a demon on each shoulder, St. Gregory of Nyssa talks about that. He says that each person at birth is assigned an angel and a demon. And it's like, just like, like in cartoons where you have the angel and the demon. But I think that I tend to apply that fractally at all beings. It is that all beings are pulled between two poles of principality, one to, let's say, their participation in God and into higher levels of being, and one which is pulling them down towards a self-sufficiency, which ends in fragmentation and conflict and destruction. So that's the way that I see let's say the conflict of, and so you could see it on your shoulder with the angel and the demon fighting. You could see it at the level of a city, let's say, with the different aspects of the city fighting in order to bring the city towards more good, or bring it towards, or the worst. Then you can see cosmically as two armies of angels and demons basically at war with each other about the nature of where the cosmos is heading, you could say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. And I think it's in, bringing in Dugin a little bit more here on his philosophical side. Are you familiar with his work, Noomakhia?
I read some Dugin 20 years ago, and then I actually, because he was a perennialist when I was in the world of perennialism, and at the time I was really opposing Dugin, like in the world of perennialists, because he seemed to have, he seemed at the time to really be with Evola in it's a seeing the warrior caste as the highest caste, seeing the Kshatriya caste as being the highest aspect of the manifestation of God, and therefore seeing the political as the highest place. And so I felt like, even at the time, I felt like he was weaponizing religion for political means. He would say things like practice orthodoxy, warrior orthodoxy, this idea of doing the Jesus prayer, but like in order to create social revolution. I was like, I really didn't like that. And so I don't know, like some people have told me that he's moderated some of his positions, but to be honest, since 2003, I really haven't read any Dugin.
Yeah, no, and I've read those earlier works, and you're absolutely right. And I think that's a barrier to entry, rightfully so. And he has changed his position pretty dramatically, and he became kind of like a proper philosopher. And so Noomakhia is now a 28-volume book series. Only maybe 5 chapters out of all 28 volumes have been translated. And he says that these 28 volumes could be a mere table of contents to the broader Noomakhia project. And the project, some of the concepts and terms in the project, he coins geosophy, philosophical countries, and the idea of Noomakhia is war of the mind, so spiritual warfare. And he says that there's the noetic realm, the theological realm, and the political realm. All 3 of these realms are nested in the nous, right? Are in the nous, right? And his position is one of civilization multipolarity, and he uses Heidegger's concept of Dasein as the subject of his 4th political theory, right? So the subject of the first political theory of liberalism is the individual, right? The subject of communism is the class, right? The subject of fascism is the race, or the ethnos, in a sense. And he says that all 3 of those are kind of self-contained in the materialist paradigm that came about in the kind of the 15th century. And he says that it's a racist paradigm, in a sense that the whole idea of exporting our global values to, let's say, Africa, for example, and that it's just, if Africa would get schools and our type of healthcare, then they would progress.
They would flourish because they were like us. Yeah, I know.
That's inherently racist. It's inherently racist.
It's so hilarious to watch these goody two shoes. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So he takes that very seriously, and he has this concept of the historial. He says, I'm an Orthodox Christian. My consciousness is orthodoxy. He says, but I have to bracket that out when I'm exploring civilizations, right? Because he says that, so he takes this perspective called the historial, which is a vantage point, a philosophical here and now. And he says it's important to do that when we're studying philosophers. And he takes a phenomenological approach to philosophy. So he calls it phenomenological philosophy. So what phenomenology did, studying the intentionality and studying the phenomenal world, he says that hasn't been done on philosophy itself. So we need to do a phenomenology of philosophy. And he does that in an anthropological sense, where he cites some of the 20th century American cultural anthropologists, how you have to get into the civilization or the culture that you're studying without your biases and go and merge yourself, into the life world of that people, right? And he says the same process in his book, Noomakhia, in his series, he's doing that with each civilization. And he said that each civilization has a logos, right? And in his exploration, all civilizations are comprised of 3 logi. So the way that I see this is just like the logi of the cup are their different qualities, right? At a spiritual level, there are logi of civilizations. And from his looking at this, he saw that initially there was 2 that he was exploring: the Apollonian logos, which light, the sun, heaven, meaning. Then there's the Dionysian logos. So the Dionysian logos is the dark logos. The Apollonian logos is the light logos. All right. In his explorations, he said a 3rd logos manifested itself, and that's the black logos. He calls it Sibyllian. So you have the Apollonian logos, the light logos, you have the Sibyllian logos, and in between you have the Dionysian logos, right? And he says that the Apollonian logos, in terms of ancient Greek philosophy, is Plato. Plato is the par excellence Apollonian philosopher.
Mhm.
The Sibyllian Black Logos philosophers are the atomists, right?
Yeah.
And in between, you have the Dionysian. So who do you think it would be the Dionysian ancient Greek philosopher? If Plato's the Apollonian,
For him, it would it be Epicurus? I don't know.
was Aristotle.
He thinks Aristotle is
think so.
Dionysian.
He says, yes, that's the same response I had, right? Because what does Aristotle do? He's focused on both the categories, right? And the ideal realm, right? Where Plato is just, there's this forms, the ideal realm, right? Aristotle was more of a mediator, right?
Yeah.
So Dionysus is a mediator. And he says he's not looking at Dionysus as the drunkard of music and excess and whatnot. Is there another type of Dionysus that he's exploring here? So these are the three categories in kind of in Noomakhia.
So he sees him as a kind of Aristotle as a translator, or like someone like a kind of a Hermes figure, maybe something like that.
Yes, something like that. And that's so it's the Dionysian is the dark logos, right? And it has parts of the Apollonian logos and parts of the Sibyllian logos, right? And we're seeing modernity is heavily and heavily colored with the Sibyllian logos, the black logos, the logos of Cybele. So he talks through that. So that's the vertical axis, right? Logos of Apollo, logos of Dionysus, and logos of Cybele. So in every culture that he's studying, whether it's African or, he breaks them down, he sees these three manifest in different proportions, at different levels, right? And so the book talks about these different cultures in this sense, and he explores the Indo-European culture using this framework. And ultimately, he's looking to towards Dasein, right, as that which is mediating understanding in each of these cultures. So it's a broad project and volume to explore civilizations, just like cultural anthropologists would get into their life world without your biases. So he says, I'm an Orthodox Christian, I need to take that out. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to kind of encapsulate that whole project, quickly, but from reading it, it's very coherent and succinct, and there's no kind of inflammatory, crazy stuff of the stuff that I've read from before from him. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll send you some stuff. He wrote a book also called The Metaphysics of the Gospel. Have you came across that at all?
No.
So let me read you a little bit here. This is from one chapter. I'll send you the book. Only a couple of chapters have been translated, but I wanted to read this. What did I do with it? There it is. So he says, Christian metaphysics, the essence of the problem. He says, Christianity is that tradition whose metaphysical dimension has been studied least of all. This was from 1999, I believe. This is quite a paradox, since one would think that such a deep study of Christianity, the religion of the West, would attract all those interested in metaphysics and who, following Guénon, are trying to make sense of the most profound aspects of tradition. Nevertheless, the disputes surrounding Christianity in traditionalist circles are, as a rule, limited to fairly secondary practical issues regarding virtual initiation of the sacraments, the absence of an idea of cyclical time, etc. And
that's because Guénon didn't understand Christianity. That's the one thing I agree with Schuon about Guénon, is that he just didn't understand. He didn't. I mean, it's weird, but he didn't understand what Christianity was about. Anyway, sorry.
Why? Why would you say he tells us?
Because
why.
he really was a Hindu ultimately in his vision of the world, and so he did not understand the incarnational principle that Christianity was trying to bring about. He even saw Christ he saw Christ through the vision of avatars, right? And so he didn't understand the reality of. He didn't understand that Christ was also bringing about the reality of incarnation as something real, as something that's true, and that's also necessary in a way, that is necessary, that things have to have bodies in order for them, and so I think that was one of the issues that Guénon dealt with. He didn't understand love. He said Christianity was not the highest form of initiation because love was a sentimental thing, and he didn't understand love metaphysically. He didn't understand the Trinity as the union of as the notion of the perfect union of one and many. Like he I don't know why. Like, I mean, for all the attention I spent on him, 20 something years ago, I don't totally get it. And he couldn't see that the communion was the highest mystery possible. Like he couldn't see that it had everything of what he called the higher mysteries in it. And he would get really annoyed when someone pointed that out, when someone said that communion is it, like that's it. It is the high mysteries. Like there's nothing more. There's nothing, you can't have a higher mystery than what communion brings. And he would get really angry. And so I don't know.
So yeah,
anyway,
the incarnational principle is love, is that where God touches his creatures, right? Touches through the incarnation, through the embodiment, so I agree. Let me read what Dugin says here. He says, in all of this, one can see a tacit consensus among traditionalists that Christianity is nothing more than a reduced, incomplete tradition whose esotericism has been practically lost and whose metaphysical content cannot be detached from the dense veil of exoteric scholastic theology and the hazy subjective intuitions of mystics. All attempts to identify any consistency between the basic problems of Christianity and the conceptual categories of other more metaphysically developed traditions, primarily Hinduism, have yielded rather poor results and have been based on strained interpretations and biased urges to arrive at any cost at conclusions which match Guénon's own ideas. Then he goes on here a little bit. Let me read a little bit more here because I think it's interesting here. It says, these circumstances, however, can be explained quite simply. The problem is that the Guénonian approach has spread only in narrow circles of the intellectual elite of the West, whereby Christianity is usually understood, in the best case, Catholicism. But the specificity of Catholicism is such that from the moment that the Western Church fell away from the Eastern Church, Catholicism built its dogmatic and intellectual foundation on a conscious rejection of the metaphysical content of Christianity. All the scholastic constructs were essentially an ambition to develop a slender theological doctrine while completely ignoring the ontological and metaphysical elements which were in fact present in the Christian tradition before the schism and preserved even afterwards. Of course, they survived exclusively on the Eastern Church, i.e. in the bosom of Orthodoxy. But Catholics and even the most profound among them seem to be unaware of this.
No, but you're so right. It's like, I remember reading Guénon saying that, he thought that one of the things that made the West fall, like, of course, he sees the beginning of the fall of the West in the arrest of the Templars, because he sees it as the royal power taking over the spiritual power and trying to subjugate it. And it's like, okay, dude. And then he says that the problem of the West is because the West lost its contact with the East. And when he says they lost their contact with the East, is that they lost their contact with the Sufis. Mm-hmm. It's so silly. It's like, and then just a few years before you have a schism between East and West, but he doesn't see it. For him, it's like completely opaque. And he doesn't see that that's actually the source of the break, and not some theoretical break with secret break with Sufis that would have happened somewhere, in the 11th, 12th century or whatever. It's just complete nonsense. So anyways, it's like, yeah, I mean, in that case, for sure, I think Dugin is definitely right, that's one of the problems. Like, people just don't, and it's so weird because it is partly that. And even it's so weird. It's like, there's so many weird things about Guénon. Like, he's talking about Nestorians, for example, as Nestorians, as these secret keepers of this these initiation, and the secret keepers of the esoteric, these esoteric secrets. And I'm like, okay, all right. So then what, and so it's like, okay, so why don't you talk about Saint Ephrem? It's like, you think that in Saint Ephraim's description of paradise, it's not all there. He talks about the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius as being this deeply esoteric text, and it's like, it's just weird. He's a weird guy in that. I think, I hate to say it because I have a respect for him as one of the prime intellectuals of the 20th century. It's like, I hate to say it, but I think that he had a bad experience. It was he was alienated because I don't know if you know the story. His wife died, and then his niece was staying with them, and his niece was helping him out because he was just as intellectual, couldn't do anything. I mean, couldn't cook, couldn't clean, couldn't do anything. And then the church took his niece away from him after his wife died. So he lost his wife and then basically lost everything. And it was the church, in his vision, it was the church that took that away from him. And so I don't know if that's it. I don't know what it is, but it's just really weird. And it's annoying when you read it. It really gets you riled up because you're like,
well, was he engaging? Like the same thing I think about Nietzsche, right? The type of Christianity that he was engaging with, his critiques are pretty accurate, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
It's the same thing with Guénon.
Why is it that he knows about, like, why does he know about Mazdaism? And why does he know about like all these obscure, why does he keep saying that there's more than one tradition in the West and that Hermeticism is a perfectly accurate tradition in the West? Like, how is it that you know so much about Hermeticism, but you don't know a single thing about Orthodoxy? Like, how's that possible? I don't know.
Why is that? Is it like,
I don't know.
Is it true that Orthodox, the writings of the fathers, the Physicality, all of these have recently been translated?
Yeah, that is
at least
true.
In the West, the last 100 years.
All right, so maybe that's true.
So that wasn't available for someone like Nietzsche, for someone like Guénon, even someone like Heidegger, who was a Protestant priest. He was going to seminary. I think they all were, reflecting on the stuff that we critique, right? And they're like, but they never had access to the fathers, to true orthodoxy, the Orthodox ethos. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon of the translations coming into the West.
Right. But it was happening while Guénon was alive, all of it. And so Balthasar, I don't know when Balthasar wrote, but I think Guénon was still alive. And Guénon has a wonderful, a super positive critique of Volossky's book. Like that, you can find it. Like he's like, oh, it seems like there's still something left in the East. It's just so frustrating. He's reading Volossky's book and he's like, oh, it gives you a little bit of hope that maybe there's some remainder of some deep mystery in Orthodoxy. It's like, man,
yeah, he felt
so frustrating.
He took a side pretty hardcore there. Let me a little bit more, just a paragraph left here. This is Orthodoxy, for its part, despite having preserved ontological and metaphysical wholeness, from a certain time onward, could no longer assert its metaphysical content, actual Christian metaphysics, in clear categories. Shortly after the Palamite disputes, when Orthodox esotericism experienced its last dazzling rise in history, this line was somewhat marginalized and frozen as a priority was given to the exoteric side of the church. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many Russian theologians and even secular philosophers, intuitively surmising the special metaphysical nature of Orthodoxy, attempted to formulate certain principles for reviving the forgotten dimension of this tradition. However, most of these attempts did not yield serious results, since none of them were familiar with the works of Guénon. Hence, why only now, in our opinion, is it possible to acquire adequate knowledge of the most important proportions of the structure of fully fledged metaphysics. And then the last section here, it can be said that although Western traditionalists had the intellectual apparatus developed by Guénon, they did not have the adequate object for applying such, since Catholicism fundamentally prohibits one from going from the exoteric to the esoteric and metaphysical levels, and moreover places insurmountable obstacles along the way. The Orthodox had and have a fully fledged object, the Orthodox Christian Church tradition, and a full irreducible dogma, but they have hitherto lacked an adequate metaphysical apparatus. Thus, for two opposite reasons, both in West and East, the most widespread, well-known, familiar, and closed tradition, Christianity, has remained the most unknown, mysterious, and closed, all the while as traditionalists rather well mastered Islamic metaphysics, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and even some archaic cults. The distant and exotic paradoxically became dearer to modern scholars nominally belonging to Christian civilization than, quote unquote, their own, and familiar and close. So I found that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with him, but I also think that there's a certain amount of dishonesty. I mean, I don't know if it's dishonesty, but there's a dishonesty in the sense that if you would ask someone like Guénon, like, where does the mystery lie? Does it lie in the description of the metaphysics, or does it lie in the embodied rites and practices and symbolic structures, that the tradition carries? And he would have agreed with me that it's not in the description of the metaphysics. Not that the description of the metaphysics or the doctrinal aspect is wrong, like it's important, but that's not where it's carried. Like the actual mystery is not carried in the books. It's not carried in the theological descriptions. And so I think that there's a certain weird dishonesty to not actually look at the ritual and to look at the liturgy, how it works, and to look at what's happening there, to look at the iconography, to look at the architecture, it's like, I mean, a good example is like Guénon wrote a whole chapter on like the amazing basically Islamic architecture, the dome and square, and how like this is basically the most perfect cosmic image for a building. And it's like, really, I mean, don't you know, like he's got to know that all those mosques are based on Hagia Sophia and on Orthodox churches. So it's like, it's another one of those things where it's just like, it's in the practice and it's in but it's also there. It's there in the poetry. It's there in the hymnography. It's all there. And I think that the idea that all of it has to be explicited for that to be real, I think is something that I disagree with. But maybe that's the mystery. Maybe it has to happen now. Like maybe now's the time as this world is kind of moving into the fringe. Maybe now's the time to make these things more explicit. And so it's like, you could say maybe in a way that's one of the things that I'm doing. I'll maybe not. I don't like talking about metaphysics too much, but at least trying to help people see, what's going on in the stuff. So anyways.
Yeah, the concept, the idea.
My love-hate relationship with Guénon is like definitely coming to the fore here.
No, and the concept we started with, the in-between, comes to mind here, right? It's not an either or, right? You need the metaphysics and you need the embodiment of the ritual. They're combined, right? They're you can't have one without the other, in a sense, right? And then the Orthodox tradition is being revealed now more than ever, let's say, than it ever has. So it's not, now we're going to focus on the metaphysics, whatever that is, and forget about the practice. It's like, are you going to kind of combine the two? Let me give you one more flavor of, I found this beautiful. Dugin wrote on the Dormition of the Mother of God. That icon. So this juxtaposition, this flip that he talks about here, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'll just read it. It's shorter. It says, the Dormition of the Mother of God is one of the most revered icons in Rus. It is the icon that was first miraculously delivered from Constantinople to Kiev, where it consecrated with its divine presence. And then later he says, in the traditional depiction of this icon, we see the lower level of the Virgin falling into slumber on her deathbed, surrounded by saints. And on the middle level, we see the figure of Jesus Christ standing, holding the soul of the Virgin Mary in the form of an infant in his hands. In considering the symbolism of this depiction, it is necessary to immediately point to the reverse analogy between the central figure of the Dormition of the Mother of God and the classical Mother of God icon. In the traditional depiction of the Mother of God, for example, the Vladimir Mother of God, Kazan Mother of God, etc., we see the adult Mother of God holding Jesus. Then in the Dormition of the Mother of God, we see the inverse, an adult Jesus Christ and the infant Virgin Mary. Explaining this contrast will help us discover the universal ontological character of the Christian tradition, which, like any other full-fledged tradition, in addition to a historical aspect, bears a deeply metaphysical, super-historical charge directly tied to the spiritual understanding of reality at large.
Yeah, he's totally right. I talked about this. There's a talk that I gave, I think it's called Sacred Art in Secular Terms, I think, where I talk about this. And what Dugin doesn't mention is that this also has to be understood architecturally, because traditionally in many churches, the icon of the sign, that's called, it's even more than the icon of the Vladimir. It's like the icon of the sign is the Mother of God with her hands open up in prayer like this, and with Christ as like a medallion on her heart. That's something which is basically in her center. And that's in the apse of the church. So it's in the far east of the church, where there's a curvature above the altar. So you can imagine that in the east of the church, you have this image of Christ being revealed to the Mother of God. And then on the western wall of the church, on the side of the sunset, you would have this image of the Dormition as this kind of reversal. So you really see this yin yang. It really is a yin yang image.
Literally in the next section, he brings up the yin yang image, quite literally.
I mean, it really is like you can't get away from it being that. It's like the masculine and the feminine, the masculine, and it creates this kind of cosmic totality.
Yeah, I'll send this to you. So can you see it? Did you see on there the Dormition there? So I love this juxtaposition of the Mother of God, right? It's the inverse of the traditional depiction of her. So the world that we're living in, the materialist world that was instantiated, we have a baby Christ, we have a baby Jesus, right? And we have the mother of God who is grown, right? So it's this overwhelming overcoating of the material, right? And the inverse of that is where you have the mother infant, the mother of God as an infant, and you have Christ reigning. So it reminds me of these two kind of posts at the beginning of Christ's entry into the earth, right? His death and resurrection. And at the end here, you have when Christ reigns, right? The physical is not diminished, but is made smaller. So the spiritual reigns. So I found that to be an interesting.
And we really have to understand this image as an image of the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The image on the Western Wall is usually either the Dormition or the Last Judgment, and it's like that's not arbitrary. Those two images are talking about the same thing, talking about the same situation. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's like this reversal that happens at the end, in which the city of God, the city of Cain, is transmuted, and it becomes a city of light, and that the body, although in its very dying, in the end, there's a transformation in which there's a reversal of priority. So I think that that's definitely what we see in that image, and it's also, you ask like, what's your hope? You could say it's like, that's my hope. The icon of the Dormition, that's an image of hope, of how in our very dying, that the seed will appear again, that's the hope,
Yeah, and if you're attentive, you can see the story playing out extremely coherently, right? So that's what I said. I don't know how it is that gives me hope, but it's like a verification or a signpost of, no matter how bad things are going materially or externally, there is this beautiful, wonderful resurrection at the end, and we're going to have to go through it to get to the end. There's no outs. There's
also a pressure, like there's a real pressure in the dying, which is, there's a weaning down. There's a reality, which is, I meet Catholics here in Quebec, or Catholicism is dying in Quebec, but then you meet Catholics and they're saying, whoever's in the church right now is there for a good reason. Like and so there's this actual weaning which happens, and there's this condensation that happens in the dying of that which is essential. And so we're forced. It's like, as we're going to lose our physical comforts, at some point, it's like we're going to have to decide what's most important. Like it's already kind of happening, but it's going to accelerate. It's going to happen more and more.
Yeah. Just a couple more minutes here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. And you're going to run out of time again anyway.
Yeah.
And I have something at 11:30, so I should break off a little bit before. Go for it.
Yeah, a couple more minutes. What do you think would be, let's say, John Vervaeke's retort or response to this last part of our discussion?
I don't know. I don't know. I think John would. I don't know. I mean,
you see why I'm asking that though? Because
I'm not sure what you mean. Like, why?
There's so much progress in having these discussions about egregores, right? About these spiritual concepts. But when it comes to this, something like this, do you have to have the dogmatic? Do you have to be a Christian to look at that and be able to appropriately internalize it? So I think it'd be interesting to see that, something like that. And I think we're getting there, like, to get to some of these deeper aspects that have a barrier to entry, actually, that I think these barriers
what we need to do is we have to help people see these patterns in the church. And so it's like so maybe you're right, like it's time to kind of expose it as much as we can, because it's like, until now, all of these things are implicit and people don't necessarily see them. They just they read the story of Adam and Eve and they're like, well, here's a funny story about, two people in a garden. It's like, no, right. So I think that bringing out these things are making someone like John far more attracted to Christianity, or far more capable of seeing it, and is making it more difficult for people to criticize it. So you can see it, all these new atheists that were around a few years ago. Jordan Peterson told me that Douglas Murray is now saying that we need some kind of spiritual grounding, or else we can't, the West can't survive. You have James Lindsay saying similar things. And these were guys who were making fun of Christianity nonstop, just like 5-6 years ago.
Brett Weinstein too. Brett Weinstein.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, there's like a holding back now. There's still like people like Sam Harris that still has the guts to go at it, or, you know, Ricky Gervais or whatever. But in general, like the discourse is changing. And so I think we just have to press on and continue to help people see, you know, the inevitability of the story of Jesus Christ. Like it's embedded in the West. It's embedded in our value system. It's embedded everywhere. And as people see it, then there's a better chance for that seed to form for the next, you know, after this collapse or whatever is going to happen.
Yeah. Amen to that. I couldn't think of a more beautiful place to end our discussion. So Jonathan, thank you. God bless you. I'd love to do this again sometime. And I wish you all the
Sure. I really
best.
like talking to you, James. So definitely another time would be great.
All right. Thank you. God
It's good
bless.
to see you again, man.
Good to see you. Talk to you
All
soon.
right, bye.
Bye.